I met Daniel on a Thursday. I remember that because it had rained that morning, and my shoes were still damp when I stepped into the bookstore where he worked. I wasn't looking for anything special, just killing time between errands. And there he was, sitting behind the counter, thumbing through a paperback with a half-drunk cup of coffee beside him. He looked up, smiled, and said, "You look like someone who needs something romantic and messy." I laughed, caught off guard. "Do I?" He handed me a book I'd never heard of. "Trust me." And I did. It started small. A conversation here, a book recommendation there, then coffee, then dinner, then months melted together until I couldn't remember what life felt like before he was in it. Daniel was simple in the best way, steady, but not boring. The kind of man who notices when your shoulders tense and rubs them without being asked, who doesn't just ask how your day was, but waits for the answer. He didn't have Jake's reckless smile or Aaron's dangerous edge, and that, I think, is why I fell. By the time we moved in together, I had deleted every old photo from my past relationships. I told myself I was ready, and for a while, I was. We built a life slowly, matching mugs, grocery lists, arguments about whether the dishes go face up or down in the washer. Nothing explosive, nothing toxic, just two people learning how to make space for each other. When he proposed, it wasn't a grand gesture. No fireworks, no big crowd. Just him and me, on our couch on a rainy night, holding hands and watching an old movie. He turned to me and said, "I'd really like to do this forever." I said yes, before he even pulled out the ring. The wedding was small, simple, just like us. I wore a second-hand dress, and he cried when he saw me walk down the aisle. That alone made everything worth it. For a while I thought, this is it. This is what it means to feel safe. But safety, it turns out, can be deceiving. 6 months after the wedding, my phone buzzed at 2:17 a.m., a number I didn't recognize. I was half asleep, but something in my stomach twisted. I opened the message. It said, "You don't know me, but you should know what your husband's doing when you're not around." Attached was a photo, blurry, nighttime, but unmistakably Daniel, and a woman, her hand on his chest, his face close to hers. I sat up in bed. I stared at the screen until the light blurred my vision. I didn't confront him right away. I told myself it could be fake, misunderstood, a prank. But my gut wouldn't shut up. Over the next week, I watched him closer. He was still kind, still present, still Daniel. But now I noticed the times he took longer to text back, the way he left the room to answer certain calls, the smile that didn't quite reach his eyes when I mentioned plans for our future. Then came the second message. Different number. Check the receipts. Ask him about the client meeting. Last Thursday. I didn't check the receipts. I checked the hotel records instead. He had booked a room under his name. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat down on the kitchen floor and let the silence wrap around me like a blanket. Because betrayal doesn't always come with shouting. Sometimes it walks in quietly, smiling, kissing your forehead, asking what you want for dinner. When I finally asked him, he didn't deny it. He just looked at me, and in the smallest voice said, "I didn't mean for it to happen." And I think that hurt worse than if he had planned it, because it meant he was careless with me, with us. I didn't sleep that night. Neither did he. We sat in the same room, not touching, not speaking, just breathing in the end of something we thought would last. And in the morning, I packed a bag. Not because I didn't love him, but because I finally loved myself more. I met Liam on a train. It was the 6:43 a.m. commuter heading downtown, and I was late, hair still damp, coffee in hand, mascara smudged from trying to multitask during stoplights. The train was packed, but there was one seat open next to him. He didn't look up from his book until I sighed and apologized for nearly spilling my coffee on his coat. He smiled. Rough morning? Something like that? We didn't speak much that first day, but over the next few weeks, we fell into a rhythm. Same train, same car, same seats. It became something, a safe corner in the chaos. We shared earbuds once when I forgot mine, talked about music, then podcasts, then life. One morning he wasn't there, nor the next, or the one after. Then, just when I convinced myself it was nothing, I saw him again. Same seat, same coat. But something in his eyes was different, distant, clouded. He greeted me politely, but didn't ask how I'd been. Later that day, I saw him again, not on the train, but walking hand in hand with a woman and a toddler. He didn't see me. I shouldn't have been surprised. But I was. He hadn't lied. He hadn't even flirted. But I had created something in my head. A storyline. A possibility. The next morning, I skipped the train and walked instead. In the cold. In silence. Trying to figure out why it stung so badly. Maybe it wasn't about Liam. Maybe it was about how easy it is to fall in love with potential. With brief kindness. With the idea of someone when what you really want is to feel like you matter in a world where people move too fast to notice. And maybe, just maybe, the person I was really hoping to meet every morning was myself. The following days felt oddly tender. I walked to work in the cold, no headphones, no distractions. I noticed things, the shape of frost on metal railings, the way early light poured between buildings, the smell of bakery bread, still warm from the ovens. It was like my senses had cracked open, suddenly starving for something real. One afternoon, I sat in a small cafe I'd never noticed before. No phone, no book. Just me and the quiet. I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the window, tired, but honest, and for once, I didn't flinch. That's when I decided to start writing again, not for anyone, just to empty the thoughts I'd stuffed down so long they no longer knocked. They whispered. I filled notebooks with half memories, imagined conversations, letters I'd never send. Somewhere in that chaos, I found clarity. Liam didn't ruin anything. He was a mirror, brief, unfiltered, unexpected. And through him, I saw my longing more clearly than I ever had. It wasn't love I craved. It was presence, witness, belonging, and maybe finally, I was learning to give that to myself. A month later, I saw him again. Same train, same seat. He looked up, our eyes met, and this time I smiled first. It wasn't bitter, it wasn't sad. It was closure, quiet and whole. He smiled back, and then we both looked away. That morning, I didn't wait for the stop to come. I stood up early, walked off the train, and into the soft light of something new. Not a man, not a promise. I was 29 when I met Owen, or rather, when I re-met him. We'd gone to the same high school. He was 2 years ahead of me, quiet, into photography, always lingering on the edges of group photos. We hadn't spoken since graduation. I ran into him at a gallery opening. My best friend had dragged me there after my breakup, trying to get me out of my head. I didn't expect to recognize anyone, let alone feel a jolt when I saw him standing across the room, still holding a camera. He smiled, like he remembered everything. We talked for 2 hours, about art, about who we used to be, about who we were still trying to become. He asked for my number before I left, said he wanted to show me the world the way he saw it. Through the lens. And over the weeks that followed, he did. We'd go walking through the city and he'd stop to photograph the smallest things. A rusted pipe, a child's chalk drawing, sunlight through a cracked window. I started to see the beauty in ordinary things again. Owen didn't fill the silence with words. He didn't try to fix what had been broken in me. He just made space for me to be. And that, I think, is what made it so dangerous. Because I fell. Hard. One night we kissed in the middle of a street with no one around, and it felt like forgiveness. But not long after, I saw the signs. Unanswered texts, canceled plans, sleepless eyes. And then one day his camera was gone, packed away in the closet. He told me he was tired, that he didn't feel like himself, that maybe he had rushed into something he wasn't ready for. I asked if it was me. He said no, but I didn't believe him. A week later, he left. Not with cruelty, just with quiet. No goodbye, no closure, just a message. I'm sorry. You deserve someone more whole. And I kept rereading that line until the words meant nothing, because I hadn't asked him to be whole. I just asked him to stay. I met Caleb during the loneliest winter of my life. I had just moved to a new city after quitting a job I hated and ending a relationship that had dragged on too long. The days were gray, the sidewalks slick with slush, and my apartment echoed with a silence I wasn't used to. We met at a laundromat. Romantic, I know. I was sitting on a bench, flipping through a wrinkled magazine, when he sat beside me with a warm grin and said, "You look like someone who misses real coffee." I laughed, mostly because I did. He invited me to a cafe around the corner while our clothes spun in the dryers. We talked about everything and nothing. He had the kind of voice that felt like a blanket and eyes that made you forget you were ever alone. From then on, we started meeting there every Sunday. Laundry, then lattes. I didn't even realize we were dating until one day he reached across the cafe table, brushed hair from my face, and kissed me like it was the most natural thing in the world. It felt easy, safe. But comfort isn't the same as connection. It took me months to admit it, to myself, let alone to him. But there was a space between us that never quite closed. I'd talk about my favorite books and he'd smile but never ask why they mattered. I'd cry during movies and he'd offer tissues without asking what broke me. He wasn't unkind. He just wasn't curious. And love without curiosity? It's like reading a novel and skipping every other chapter. When I told him I needed more, he nodded, said he understood, that he'd try. But trying isn't the same as showing up. Eventually, our Sundays went back to being quiet. Then, they disappeared altogether. The last time I saw him, he said, "You were always somewhere else in your head. I just hoped you'd land near me." And maybe he was right. Maybe I was searching for a feeling no one else could give me. Maybe I was just learning how to hold my own story again, fully, deeply, even the pages that no one else read. Her name was Natalie. I'd never dated a woman before, not seriously, not out loud, but she made it impossible to hide. We met at a summer writing workshop. She was bold where I was hesitant, spoke in metaphors, laughed with her whole chest, and read poetry like it was prophecy. The first time we kissed, I forgot how to breathe. With Natalie, everything was heightened. Wine tasted sweeter, music sounded deeper. My own words on the page felt more alive when she read them back to me. She made me feel like I was made of light, but light can't be bottled, and not everyone knows how to handle fire. It started with small things, her temper when I needed space, the way she'd rewrite our arguments as if she were crafting fiction, not recalling truth. She was always the heroine in her version. I was always the one who couldn't keep up. But I stayed. Because when it was good, it was breathtaking. And when it wasn't, I told myself, maybe love is supposed to hurt a little. One night, she read a new piece aloud in front of the group. It was beautiful, haunting, visceral, raw. Everyone clapped. And then I realized it was about me. Every flaw I'd ever confessed, every insecurity, Every quiet admission, all dressed in metaphors, but clearly painfully me. I smiled through it, applauded, pretended I wasn't unraveling. Later, when I asked her why, she said, "You told me your story." I just gave it shape. But it wasn't her story to tell. We broke up 2 weeks later. Or rather, she left in a dramatic storm of slammed doors and poetry quotes, saying I was too afraid to be seen. But I wasn't afraid to be seen. I was afraid to be distorted. Now, when I write for myself first. Not for applause, not for approval. And I remember Natalie not as a villain, but as a lesson. Some people will fall in love with your soul just to turn it into a story. But the real story, the one that matters, is the one you tell yourself and refuse to give away.